That was nice. Is it... I'm gonna sit here. Camp on these elites. Holy crap, I decimated that pack. Ouch. Trash up. Very nice. It was so close. Greetings, this is Cratic. Today we'll be going over an Arcane Torrent Static Discharge Manald Heal Archon based build. This build being one of the reverse Archon type builds. By that I mean you're going to be dealing most of your damage outside of Archon using the Static Discharge to proc Paralysis and the Manald Heal. The interesting thing here is you're going to be using Archon mainly to simply empower the build once you get outside of Archon. And so it's a different sort of play style. If you've ever seen the Frozen Orb Archon build, that's another type of this build. So very, very, very cool setups indeed. Just something I've never personally gotten into, right? This is probably one of the first builds that I've reverse Archon type builds that I've actually enjoyed playing. Back in the day, I really enjoyed playing the non-Archon build that just leveraged Static Discharge, and that build was pretty cool. This is you could run Tal Rasha or Firebirds with that type of build, but basically the cool thing about this is it was very gear efficient. All you had to slot was extra attack speed on gear, you know, wherever you could, basically, and then as much as possible, because the gems you're using were Trapped, Teguk, and Pain Enhancer. You know, not using Stricken, just leveraging there was so low attack speed in this setup that leveraging the extra attack speed from Pain Enhancer ended up being better than Stricken, in my opinion. Yeah, so it's not quite as true for this particular setup, but it's a similar playstyle. You're basically just channeling the Arcane Torrent to proc the Manald Heal, right? Similar thing, except in this variation you have to manage the Archon rotation, you have to keep an eye on different offensive and defensive bonuses, so it's a little bit, it mixes it up, and it's also significantly more powerful, at least 5 Gritorous more powerful than the non-Archon variations. Right, so anyway, if this interests you, we'll continue on. So there are a lot of things going on with this build, and a lot of interactions that you're going to want to be aware of, so I'll try and cover those as best I can. But before we do that, first let's go over some of the multipliers in the build, just so you have a general idea of what those are and how they're going to help out in the setup. We have a lot of multipliers for channeling, specifically, so the Deathwish is a flat multiplier for while we're channeling. Since our damage is going to come from the Arcane Torrent proccing the Manald heal ring bonus. We will be channeling at the time and be able to benefit from Deathwish. Same thing with the Taeguk gem. We're going to stack that up to 10 stacks and be able to gain extra damage from this additive bonus. And it's a hefty additive bonus, which is why we're going to want to go for Taeguk. Bending the Trapped, of course, giving us a huge multiplier, also being procced by Paralysis. So while we also have an Audacity in the build, meaning it's beneficial to be up close to enemies, it's not necessarily required. For example, if an Oculus were to spawn a little bit away from your target, you could stand in the Oculus and still not worry too much, because you would still, you know, come out ahead in the long run when your paralysis stuns the enemy, right? So that's something to consider. We also have the Orb of Infinite Depth, giving us up to a 40% multiplier, and it works out very well in this build. Since we are dealing a lot of our damage outside of Archon, we can leverage this bonus for a longer time than if we were trying to deal our damage inside Archon, which is quite nice. Here's the Manald heal, of course. Enemies stunned with paralysis also take 14,000% weapon damage as lightning. It's a huge bonus, and basically what that means, you can read up more on the Manald heal. I'll put some links in the description, but it's going to deal damage within a window, is the gist of it. I think it's 1.25 seconds currently. I'll have to double check that, but and basically over the course of this window, it will tick a certain number of times in that window based on our attack speed. The higher the attack speed, the more times it ticks, the more times it deals damage, and the better able we are to kill enemies, right? So that's the gist of it there. We're also using before I forget, the Traveler's Pledge and the Compass Rose, the Endless Walk set. Since we'll be channeling a lot in this build, standing still, using our teleport to move around, or our Archon teleport to move around, the damage bonus from this ring set will be up most of the time, if not, you know, all the time. Archon Stacks going to be very important with this build. Vyr6 giving us extra damage and damage reduction, armor and resistance coming in from the 4-piece, attack speed from the 4-piece as well. We're wearing Vyr with this particular build pretty much because of the 4-piece set. It's giving us a lot of that attack speed that we would otherwise be unable to make any other way in the game, and let us hit those high breakpoints. Now, in particular, you're going to want to watch for 2 different levels of attack speed, 2 different stack counts that you're going to want to meet in your Archon rotation. The first is related to Manald heal and Manald heal procs. We want to be attacking at the maximum tick rate possible, 15 ticks per second for Manald heal, to tick as many times as possible within the Manald heal proc window, deals much damage. To hit that amount, you have to hit 4 APS. Now, I'll post numbers in the guide depending on how many attack speed rolls you have on your gear, but just know that this is the first breakpoint you're going to want to hit, Manald heal. Manald heal also functions as a guideline for when you should punch and when you should use the beam. Now, the second breakpoint is beam stacking. By that I mean the disintegration wave, which is the skill for the Archon beam. The stack rate of the beam is determined by a snapshot when entering Archon, and this snapshot is set. It includes both the previous Swami stacks that you have, Swami holdover, so this stack here, and it's going to add whatever I acquired in that previous Swami to the 50 stacks of the new Archon. So whatever this is plus the 50, as long as you're hitting 5 APS with that amount, you will be then stacking the beam at the fastest rate it can go. So that's a little bit higher of a stack count, as you can imagine, but it's not unattainable. So something we're going to want to be doing is trying to hit that upper limit so as to stack the beam as fast as possible. And how we, first thing we need to have as far as setup to make this happen is about 61% cooldown. Any less than this and it seems to not work. You just can't get any Swami overlap. Now watch here. I will barely be able to cast it in time to snapshot that amount, which is what we want, right? And as long as you're hitting 5 APS there, you get max stacking with the beam at that point. So after that point, you'll mostly use the beam to do stacking, and you won't have to use the punch as much. Now, like I said before, you're only going to want to use the punch if your snapshot is not set yet, or it's very low, or you know you haven't hit above that amount to make the beam more beneficial. So you use the Archon Punch, the Archon Strike at the beginning of the rift after you've died, this sort of thing, and it will stack up faster. But after you hit above the Manald heal proc breakpoint, that's when you can start using the beam, as per this. Now let's go and take a quick look at here. This is Tin's post, and I'll put a link in the description. If you have 5 APS when you first enter Archon, and 5 APS while single stack, beam stack equals strike stack count. Pretty cool, but somewhat rare. Sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. This situation, number 2, if you have 5 APS when you enter Archon, and you're between 4 and 5 APS while single stacked, which is more typical, the beam stack count is greater than the strike stack count. So that's why we're typically using the beam in this build. Otherwise, if we are lower than that, we will use the strike, right? So there you have it. Okay, one skill you're also going to want to be using is the Archon Blast, the Lightning Blast ability. This will help you gain additional Archon stacks each time it's cast and hits an enemy nearby your character. So when you're in Archon form and as you're beaming and moving through the rift, you want to make sure you're landing or standing near enemies to be able to hit them and stack up more. So you may ask why I'm running lightning percent on my bracer. If you're unaware, Vyr6 with the lightning percent takes the max elemental damage roll, and that's what it uses to basically tell Archon which element to run with or transform into. Chosen lightning, so that means in Archon form we'll be proccing paralysis and Manald heal damage, which with this build you're dealing most of your damage outside of Archon, so you'd ask why do you need it inside Archon? Well, the reasons are twofold. First, you're going to want to actually use it as a defensive mechanism, sort of being able to stun monsters, control the battlefield as you're moving around the map, kite monsters, and be able to kind of control where they're coming and how they're going to be positioned is quite nice. Number 2, we're also using this as a means to deal, it's not going to deal a lot of damage, but if you can deal enough damage to kill off little monsters, little mobs, or low HP monsters at the time near the end of your Archon cycle, you can have that Oculus ring spawn proc immediately, which is great as you enter your damage cycle. You don't have to spend time within your non-Archon form killing enemies and repositioning to create the Ring of Power. You can just leverage that extra multiplier immediately, and it's very efficient in that way. Very hard to do that, but when it works out, it's beautiful, right? Alright, so let's talk a little bit about the Archon rotation. There are a lot of defensive mechanisms that we're going to want to keep an eye on while we're going through the rift, and it can be difficult as we're entering and exiting Archon to manage those defenses. Now I'm going to start by going over as you're in non-Archon form, you'll be able to cast Explosive Blast and therefore keep up the Orb of Infinite Depth bonus. As you enter Archon, however, your skills are replaced and you cannot cast Explosive Blast anymore, meaning that the OID bonus will only last up to 6 seconds while you're in Archon. this is basically a window of time that you're going to want to use effectively to stack up Archon stacks as much as possible while you have higher defenses remaining in Archon form. As soon as this lapses and you will feel a defensive hit, your Archon stacks will be pretty much all that are going to be helping keep you up when Archon form. At lower stack count, of course, we'll have lower damage reduction, lower armor, lower resistances, so just keep an eye out, watch out for those heavy hitting attacks at that point, and then as your Archon cycle continues and you stack up more Archon stacks, you will feel again more defensive. Carini, of course, being the one constant with the storm armor hitting enemies at least 15 yards away. You don't have to keep an active eye on this so much, just make sure that you are pretty much standing, you have enemies that are 15 yards away wherever you're positioned, and it usually will hit enemies. Every now and again, if you are engaged with a group that is densely packed in, that's when this might start to lapse or drop, or low density situations you might have to keep more of an eye on it, but this is one of the bonuses that will be up whether we are inside Archon or outside Archon, as long as storm armor is applied, which is pretty cool. Now going back to the Archon rotation, we're inside Archon, we've stacked up a lot of our Archon stacks, but as we're transitioning out of Archon, and we will become again really vulnerable, even more vulnerable arguably than when we were entering Archon, right? So reason being is we will also not have Orb of Infinite Depth stacks up. We will still have to cast and have the Explosive Blast land, and as this is stacking up, it will be very challenging to survive. So my advice is, you know, if you're really having a hard time with the mob set, whoever you're engaging, definitely use your teleport safe passage to help you get around. That will keep up your defenses, and you want to use it immediately because you want the cooldown to be reset as quick as possible in case an Oculus spawn comes up. That way you can use it again to get into the Oculus. Another method is you could just not use teleport if the mob type is a little bit more tame, dealing less damage to you. You don't have to teleport immediately, you just save the teleport until the Oculus spawn comes up. But teleport, a nice method to hold you over in this time period where we're waiting for Explosive Blast to hit, and as it stacks up. When you come out of Archon, you'll get hit with a lot of damage, and your life pool will drop rapidly. And usually you end up somewhere in the 30% HP range before your Explosive Blast stacks start to come up, and then your defense rises, and that's when it's really important that you have this life per hit roll, because that's going to kick in and start restoring your health and putting you back up to full before you get one shot, right? So that's the idea anyway, as far as defense is concerned. Hope that helped. And there's one other thing you might want to keep an eye on. I don't in the long run think it's super important, but that just is to keep an eye on CC resistance, the CC resistance levels of enemies, both for defense and for offense. We have a lot of stuns in this build. We have paralysis, so anything we're beaming, punching, can proc the paralysis bonus and stun enemies. We also have a lot of freezes due to the Vyr6 set. One of the Archon runes does allow freezes for the Archon punch and the blast effect. When those go off, you will freeze enemies nearby. So basically anytime you're in Archon, and especially when you're nearby enemies, if you're doing as I'm recommending and keeping the blast on autocast, you will freeze enemies, and they will eventually become resistant to your stuns and can then just completely obliterate you if you're not moving around and watching their resistance levels. In addition, there is a tactic that you can use to, if you're engaged with an elite, to ensure you're able to proc them in all teal right when you come out of Archon form on them with the static discharge. You can just avoid them completely, make sure you don't stun them at all. That way you know they're fresh and ready to be stunned with the paralysis from Manald heal right when you get out. It's a little bit difficult though because there's so many stuns in the build and the beam is so wide, so don't fret if you mess that up. It's not something you have to play by. Especially, I find that comes more into play, and you're more able to play in that manner when there's only one elite and you have a lot of trash nearby. You can just cycle around the edges of the trash until you come into non-Archon form. And the Oculus spawn is right there, right? The other situation might be where you've got more than one elite, or you've got multiple elite packs, and there may or may not be a lot of trash anymore. Just focus strictly on, keeping them CC'd and stacking Stricken on them, because that does a lot, does help out in the long term through the Rift as you're engaging these elites, just ever so slightly as well. It's kind of difficult because a lot of the wizard abilities are AoE based, but just try as best you can, and I think it, or at least to me, it seems like it also helps out quite a bit. For the third gem slot, we're going to go with Stricken, Bane of the Stricken, functioning to help us deal a little bit of extra damage, of course, through the Rift, as I said before, on elites, but mostly it's to help kill that Rift Guardian insanely fast. One of the quickest wizard builds, solo wizard builds at least, I've seen to kill the Rift Guardian. Been able to 2-cycle a binder Rift Guardian, and 2-cycle means sub 1 minute, and that's by leveraging the Oculus spawns, and also I believe the extra damage from the Pig Sticker being a beast, Rift Guardian, so there you have it. But it's possible, right? So Stricken, of course, being stacked up insanely fast because we have so much attack speed in this build. You'll be able to hit the lower FPAs, even if we are channeling a lot in the build, and sort of not being able to stack up more efficiently with the Stricken. It's still an insane amount of attack speed. You will stack Stricken very fast in this build. I did test out other options. I tried Pain Enhancer, I tried Gogok, I tried Zay in combination with the Starfire and the Power Hungry, and in general, that setup just felt a little just disjointed, very hard to manage, and overall, too much more RNG. The Rift Guardian kill times were just too long, in my opinion. Same thing with Gogok and Pain Enhancer, but Gogok, you could end up slotting the cooldown on gear in other places. With Pain Enhancer, you can slot a Dagger, to help make up the attack speed, and it's more efficient that way. Anyway, so there are other purposes you can fill the roles of all these gems that you could potentially slot, and it just turns out that Stricken is the best choice here. As much as I enjoyed the non-Archon build that didn't use Stricken, no Stricken build, this build actually is better using Stricken, in my opinion. So go with Stricken and be happy. Resource in this build is mostly provided through Arcane Power on crit. This roll comes from the source. Critical hits grant 4 Arcane Power. Works in combination with the Arcane Torrent, the skill. This skill has a very high proc coefficient. Working in tandem, they allow a very high recovery rate of Arcane Power, especially with the Static Discharge rune and the side bolts. In density, this can restore quite a bit of Arcane Power. Now, another good means of cost reduction here is Storm Armor. Power of the Storm rune reduces arcane power cost of all skills by 3 while Storm Armor is active. This means the base cost of Arcane Torrent, which does have quite a high channeling cost, will be reduced, which is very important, especially since we'll be at super high attack speeds on this build. You can, if you didn't have many of these methods of recovery, your arcane power pool would just like go down to 0 immediately. It's kind of funny to watch sometimes. But one other thing that I've opted for, this is the optional skill slot. I've chosen to go with Magic Weapon Conduit. Conduit, of course, being the rune that helps restore arcane power as well. This is also linked to proc coefficients, so it works very well with the arcane torrent as well. The reason I went with this is, just based on testing the build without it and engaging low density and single target Rift Guardians. This is what helps or allows you to do this, and it seems to be more impactful in my playstyle than the other options, and I'll go over those in a little bit. There are some alternate skill options, maybe even more powerful skill choices that can go in this slot, so just keep that in mind. Magewraith and conduit, of course, also giving us a tad bit of extra additive damage increase, which is quite nice. It's not a full 10%, but it works out to be something usually in about the 6% additional damage range, right? So a little bit of extra damage there. And we will, of course, there is an option. I'm going to put an option on gear for RCR. The build doesn't require any additional arcane power cost reduction except that amount from Paragon, which is 10%, however, and the Inspire ability on the Templar, of course. A little bit of extra regeneration there, but you can opt on the shoulders. I'm going to put a place instead of all resist here. You could go for 8% resource cost reduction as well if you feel you need some of that. So just keep that in mind. That is an option. So we have a few other utility items and effects in the build. One of the coolest ones being, since we have a pretty much an open bracer slot with this choice of skill, I'm going to go with the Krelm's buff bracers. And the Krelm's buff bracers will make us immune to knockback and stun effects, basically negating the knockback elite affix, the vortex elite affix, and there are a lot of monsters in the game that just tend to stun. So this will help when you're surrounded by that type of monster, or in being able to engage that mob type even. Helps out quite a bit with Rift RNG and being able to channel and continue to proc your Manald heal, because it's just very disruptive if you are interrupted in the middle of your Manald heal proc window for this build. Because we're dealing such a huge amount of damage in such a short amount of time, getting disrupted halfway in between that window can mean the difference of a lot of damage in Rift progression, right? So having this bracer is very beneficial for this build. There are some optional bracer swaps that mostly come with the optional skill swaps, so I'll go over those in a little bit. We're also using the Unstable Anomaly passive in this build, very important to give us that second chance on life. With Archon, it's even more important in my opinion because it's so disruptive to have to restack up your Archon stacks. It basically takes an entire Archon cycle just to get back to where you were before you died. So, Unstable Anomaly, very important. One of the legendary effects sort of overlooked oftentimes, being the Pig Sticker. The secondary damage to beasts and humans is very important, especially helping determine which mobs and Rift Guardians are going to be the best on an ultimate push. Mob mixes that this build tends to challenge well include Bees Accursed, you've got spiders, you've got spiders, swarms, mix swarms, you've got cultists, ghosts. All of these tend to work out very well against the build, specifically because of this bonus. You also have an extra affix on the Pig Sticker, which is very huge. It doesn't seem huge, but it is huge, because it means you can slot extra damage. Pig Sticker functioning also as a dagger, helping us, as I said before, hit those higher attack speed levels. Very important. In Season, it will be fairly easy to get Ancient, or perhaps even Primal, just by upgrading additional rare daggers in Season. The upgrade rare recipe from the cube will help you easily find that perfect dagger of your dreams, simply because the pool size for daggers is very low. For Wizard, there are only 3 daggers in the pool, but even more important for Necromancer, there are only 2 daggers. So my recommendation is, if you're running this build in Seasons, is to level up an alt Necromancer, just power level Necromancer up to 70, and then craft your daggers, your rare daggers via the cube on the Necromancer, because the dagger itself will roll with the same stats. You still get int on the dagger from a Necromancer craft as you would on a wizard, but you aren't you don't have that additional dagger in the dagger pool, which makes getting the perfect pick sticker a lot easier. So yeah. Also not typical, you can tank molten explosions. You pretty much tank 1 to 2 in non-Archon form, which is great. It means you can stay in the Oculus ring more often. There are a lot of other elite affixes that you should look out for. Definitely want to try and avoid Frozen, Nightmarish, anything that could CC your character or force you to move out of position. Wormhole can also be a bother. Let's see, not typical in most wizard builds, but is something of a bother with this build, is Poison Enchanted. So the poison pools and the second poison effect that come out and cover the ground, the damage over time can actually be very detrimental to this build, especially if you're staying in the same area for an extended period of time, such as when in your non-Archon form. This will actually start to deal more damage than you can recover, and yeah, it forces you to move, so it can be detrimental as well. Similarly, Desecrator in combination with any of those can be very, very bothersome. Also look out for shielding, can also be a bother, but you can also play around it, meaning that if you're in Archon form and the shield is up on the elite, that's usually a good thing, because by the time you get to your non-Archon form, the shield will have been down and you can deal damage to them and decimate them. But shielding can be very detrimental to the build because our cycles are very short and we're dealing damage in such short windows. Having a shield up on an elite, preventing us from dealing damage from them, can be detrimental. So just keep an eye out for that. You can play around it. Juggernaut, also an affix that is hit or miss. Usually a solo Juggernaut is not worth engaging, but if you can kite them next to or have multiple elites with the Juggernaut in it, that's usually okay because you're going to come out ahead anyway. By the way, the Paralysis and Manald will still deal damage to a Juggernaut elite. It's just going to take longer to kill them. It won't stun them, but it'll take longer to kill them because of the increased health pool, right? And yeah, so other affixes that usually are a bother with Wizard, but are really great with this build include a Teleporter isn't as much of a bother, a Missile Dampening doesn't affect us at all, so there are a lot of really good affixes to engage. Health Link, also a great affix, to find, so there are a lot of good affixes that you can engage with this build, which is very, very appealing in my opinion. Vortex and Knockback, of course, getting negated with the Krelm's Butt Bracer. It's just a great setup, right? As far as Pylons go, you're going to want to look out for Conduit and Power during the Rift. These two will be used to decimate elite packs, collect extra progress orbs, that sort of thing. Power, I mentioned, mostly functioning as a rift clearing mechanism because you're only really going to have one cycle with which, non-Archon cycle, with which to deal damage to the power in order to maintain your Archon rotation. So you really only get half of the duration that a normal power would have. So my opinion is that in order to maximize its effect, you should definitely be using this on the elite and not the Rift Guardian, especially since this build is so good at killing the Rift Guardian anyway, and you need to stack up Stricken against the RG probably to make it effective as well, because with only half duration power on the RG, you're still going to need some level of Stricken, so it just makes more sense to do it in the Rift. The other pylon I think is really excellent for this build is shielding. Shielding works great against multiple elites as well, but more functioning as the Rift Guardian killer pylon. Like, just being able to stand and channel against the RG is huge to be able to kill them effectively, right? And let's see, what else? We've got Speed. Speed is also situationally useful. During the Rift, it's can function as a boost at the beginning of rift levels, but other than that, I really hadn't noticed any benefit from the speed pylon. Typically, if I'm going to use a pylon to skip a rift, it's not going to be the speed pylon. It's actually going to be the channeling pylon. Channeling pylon isn't really useful for anything else other than skipping levels, so yeah. Now, as far as the follower, I prefer the Templar. He offers many different things that can help us out. The resource, as mentioned before, he also can be equipped with an S of Johan if you want, help group enemies, which can work out to your advantage. You can go with another amulet if you so prefer. I also really like the Thunder Fury for this setup. It helps slow enemies, procs trapped, especially on the Rift Guardian. It slows the attack speed of the Rift Guardian. That can be pretty big as well. The rolls you're going to want on your follower are cooldown and attack speed, as much as you can get. Basically, that will help reduce the cooldown specifically of his heal ability. The time you're going to be taking most damage in this build is when you drop out of Archon. You're going to take a ton of damage and your health pool is going to go down low. Well, that heal will hopefully be up and ready to hit you at that moment when you're most in need, in addition to having the ability to use a potion of some type. You can heal up fairly readily in time for your damage reduction to kick in. Now you can go with the Enchantress if you so prefer. Enchantress, of course, offering that extra attack speed bonus, which would be very helpful. If I did run with the Enchantress, I would only go with the auras and not the crowd control effects, the charm effects. So there are some alternate options for this skill slot. I've chosen Magewraith and Conduit, again, for the resource and being able to engage single target Rift Guardians, low density, those types of situations. However, if you wanted to go more defensive, you could go with Diamond Skin Prism. This rune on Diamond Skin reduces the arcane power cost of all skills while it is active. And because we have quite a high cooldown amount in this build, it will be up fairly often, even without the extra defense we might get from Ashnagar's Blood Bracers. You don't really need that. The extra shielding here will be nice, however, for when you come out of Archon, being able to shield immediately and allowing that to help protect you while you're waiting for your explosive blast to come down can be quite nice. Another skill option, more offensive, and this, in my opinion, what you would call the meta variation of this build would be to go with Black Hole Spellsteal. Black Hole Spellsteal providing a lot of additive damage depending on how many enemies you hit, also reducing their damage by 10% for a short duration. This is quite nice with the build because it lets you also, the black hole itself lets you pull in enemies together, which means you can pull multiple elite packs together, or just a blue pack, for example, just pulling them together to deal damage more efficiently with the static discharge Monaltio procs, right? There are some options here. This, of course, I found to be very difficult to maintain resource on. It's also very particular. It's a very it makes the build a lot more challenging to play, in particular, because you have to decide, there's even more decision to make as far as managing resource, when to cast your black hole, where to cast it, making sure you're going to be positioned well for Oculus. You know, all these things come into play, and it's just a very difficult alternative, right, in my opinion. But it is high damage, should let you push at least 1 GR higher, maybe even more with great skill, I don't know, but there's also the potential here for alternate bracer. In my opinion, the Krelm's buff bracer are going to be the best option for this build in any variation, but if you're using the black hole, you can look into using the strong arm bracers, giving you that extra damage when enemies are hit by knockbacks. You can also look into another good bracer in general, even if you're not using the black hole, to look into would be Lacuni Prowlers. These allowing you extra attack speed that would let you perhaps run without quad gloves, or perhaps run with an additional attack speed roll in gear, letting you hit those breakpoints even quicker. So it's something to consider as well. But as I mentioned, in my opinion, Krelm's. Alright, so let's dive in take a look at the affixes for this build. Going to be very difficult to get this all in season. If you're ever looking for a challenge, this might be the build that gets you in season, right? So, Hill of Carini, Manald Heal, always going to be difficult to roll. Compass Rose as well. Other hard pieces to get. A 50 stack Philus Improbable Chain as Ancient can always be difficult. Quad Gloves as Ancient as well, really difficult. A helmet with physical reduces control, impairing effects can be difficult. So a lot of different things here, especially when you include the perfect secondary that you're going to want, can be quite difficult. Pick Sticker, while easy to roll, can be hard to perfect at times. So yeah, a lot going on with this build gear-wise, but it makes it exciting when you do get an upgrade, right? So it's one of the motivators in season. Let's see. For first of all, you're going to want cooldown. Let's go to cooldown. At least 61% minimum. And cooldown comes from, in this build, the paragon, evocation, diamond in the helmet, shoulders, gloves, both rings. You're going to want the source and the weapon as well. Now, as you can see here, I do not have perfect rolls. For example, on my weapon, it's not perfect, and that is perfectly fine. As long as you're hitting at least 61, 62.6 being the highest you could hit with that combination of items and skills and abilities. Now, very important as well is the attack speed that you're going to have on your gear. Having lower attack speed can be very detrimental to being able to hit those breakpoints, or might shift the level at which the number of stacks are required for the build. So there are a couple of different variations that I'm going to recommend. The first being how I have set it up currently is 7% attack speed on Dagger required. I have 7% on my gloves, quad gloves, attack speed, cooldown, crit, and then I also have here the Traveler's Pledge with 7% attack speed, crit. So that's 2 attack speed rolls on armor and jewelry, besides having the dagger roll. Note here that I have the Templar. The second setup involves only having one of these 2 attack speed rolls on armor or jewelry, and then running with the Enchantress. So a little bit easier to gear, but you have less utility from the follower, right? So Enchantress, of course you might run without those cooldown, the crowd control effects on the Enchantress if you so desire. Currently I have the charge equipped on the Templar, so anyways, side note, besides that simple guideline with the attack speed, it's pretty free where you want to put the attack speed and on the gear. Another cool trick you can do is if you have a cooldown crit amulet. For example, if my cooldown here on the Traveler's Pledge were a little bit better rolled, say 8% crit, I could put this amulet on, and then I could run attack speed in some other location. For example, on one of my rings, if I happen to get a Compass Rose that's attack speed crit instead of cooldown crit, that is something you can do. Instead of running the attack speed amulet, you can run just the attack speed ring and then run a cooldown amulet instead. So you can kind of swap it around a little bit as required, or as the gear is handed out to you, which is one of the cool things that you can do with this build. Another option to gain attack speed is run the Lucuni Prowlers. I would recommend life per hit on the Lucunis as well in place of attack speed, or sorry, vitality I mean. The downside here is a huge downside to dropping the Krelm's buff bracers. I feel the Krelm's buff bracer is best because of, you know, elite RNG being such a thing, and of course you're going to want offensive stats, crit on the helmet, the bracer, and the source. You're going to want crit on the amulet and the gloves, both of your rings, of course, and other stats you're going to want. Let's see, resource-wise, we're going to want Arcane Power on crit, Again, 4 arcane power, giving us that extra recovery we're going to need. You can opt for, and if I had this shoulder, I probably would go for it as well, is an int vite RCR, so resource cost reduction roll on the shoulder piece instead of all resistance as I have here, and then cooldown. Would be very nice to have that extra RCR roll, especially when you happen to get a single target Rift Guardian. Can make the difference in being able to just stand and channel. Huge benefit there. So if I could, I would roll resource here, but if you happen to get an all resist shoulder or maybe a life percent shoulder instead, those are also good defensive affixes in that slot. Life percent you're also going to want on the belt. Definitely going to want a lot of vitality in the build. So the helmet, the shoulder piece, the chest piece, the belt, the pants, and the boots are going to be where you want your vitality. Similarly, you're going to want a lot of armor where you can fit it in, which means boots, all resist armor, armor on the belt, the pants, and the chest piece. Just getting that base amount of armor up. I have been using as my potion the bottomless potion of the tower. Not sure if that's best. It seems to be working fairly well though for this particular build. Seeing as Wizard has a base amount of armor that's fairly low compared to other classes. Other things you're going to want to look out for, other affixes. Secondary affixes in particular that are going to be really important include physical resistance, single resistances on armor slots, physical resistance in particular, and then reduces duration of control impairing effects. Really important, especially when you happen to get that one elite pack that happens to be frozen or nightmarish. Reducing the duration by up to 50%, so having 2 of these rolls at least can be huge for the build, and highly recommended. Just as a note, perfect placement would be to put these on the helmet and the amulet, which is insanely hard to get, but if you happen to get these on rings as well, you can go for those on rings instead, and that's perfectly fine. Another secondary affix that I found very useful is just a little bit of extra pickup radius, so getting this on belt, pants, and shoulder piece can be very useful in just getting a little tiny bit of extra pickup radius as you're moving through the rift, being able to scoop up those orbs a little bit easier and not die trying to grab them can be quite nice. Range reduction, melee reduction, if you can fit it in on the chest piece or maybe the bracer, can be quite nice, so keep a lookout for those as well. And yeah, so I think that's about it for affixes. Getting some nice practice in, that is assured. We have an Inferno, Scavengers, Demons, Pressers. Name is Juggernaut, but he's not Juggernaut. Can confirm, not Juggernaut. Let's move. We got blue ghosts. They will follow well. We have shielding pylon. good mobs down here. Nothing really else. Got some more blues. Arcane Enchanted. Do a quick trash pull. Whatever else I can hit. There's blues up there. Let's see if I can pull them down. Trash up. Very nice. Power Pylons, Serpents here. Let's see if I have anything else. No, I might as well just use it on them. Spire. Terrible mob set. Frozen Pulse. I think it was Missile Dampening, not sure. Oh, it's two elites there. Blues, Chargers. Keep cutting these down. Another yellow Juggernaut. kite the mass. No, don't kill me. Please don't die. Couldn't see the Oculus at all. It's like, I don't know where it is. Blue's in the corner. Looks like the big map. We're going to kite these yellows down. Speed. So sad. Whoa. Not bad, not bad. Let's keep kiting. Got some blues. Alright, they're coming through, they're coming through. Good Oculus. Let's go. There's my conduit. Click it and go. Where's my Carini? It's a Scandial. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Should work out well with the ads. Should give us a lot of Oculus Ring procs. Stacking Stricken will be slower though. Whoa. All right. It's madness. Oh my. All right, you just saw a Greater 113 with a terrible mob set on a huge spire, which was pretty amazing, but Greater 113. A minute to spare, no less. That was pretty good. The conduit wasn't even well positioned. Wow. Alright, there's the skills. Here's the gear. Note that a lot of my gear actually is unaugmented, and I made up for this by putting points into paragon. However, I've also unassigned paragon points, which should make it such that I'm trying to aim for about a paragon 1550 equivalent here. As you can see, I still have paragon unassigned. I'm running the Templar at current. The change we made here was to run extra attack speed, while still having just a tad of Swami overlap for that snapshot, right? And that's it. Thank you.